Hi everyone, I'm Professor Casey and welcome to quick review number 8 for AGR 112. This is on multidimensional arrays. We're going to talk a little bit about the basics of multidimensional arrays and specifically how to use them with loops and how to pass them down to functions. So let's get started. Okay, so let's look quickly at this program. This is a really simple multidimensional array program. Probably the easiest illustration of multidimensional arrays is with matrices, so that's what I decided to go with. I declared some macros for my multidimensional arrays so they'd have 3 rows and 3 columns each. So wherever you see rows and columns, that's just 3 and 3. This makes it easy to change if I wanted to make that matrix bigger. So you can see where I declare my multidimensional array, you declare it the same way you would a regular array, except you have an extra set of brackets on the end. And if I had a 3-dimensional array, right, I just have 3 sets of brackets, 4, 5, 6, etc. You can have as many brackets as you can keep track of in your mind. I also have some counter variables for my for loops, I and j. Now here, you may be taking in values into your multidimensional array from a file. You may have them set at the beginning like we talked about in the arrays video, but a lot of the time you're gonna have a user enter them. So that's what this setup is here for. Remember, when you have a multidimensional array, you're going to have a for loop for every single dimension of that array. So if I have a 2-dimensional array, the minimum number of for loops I have to have is 2. I have to have enough loops for the rows and enough loops for the columns. And what this is going to do is it's going to go through and set each of the columns for row 0, 0, 1, 2, each of the columns for row 1, 0, 1, 2, then each of the columns for row 2, 0, 1, 2. So that's how these for loops are going to work. If you are having trouble conceptualizing this, I highly encourage you to use the debugger when you're going through your multidimensional arrays and look as it changes each of those pieces of the array in the watches file. Okay, so we're going through, we're scanning in the values for each dimension of the matrix. Then we're just going to print it back out. So I just wanted to show you how to print out a multidimensional array. Same thing, right? Nested for loops. You're always going to have nested for loops. When you're scanning in a multidimensional array, you're going to be scanning into the address of the I row, so the counter for your rows variable, and then the jth column, so the counter for your column variable. When you print them out though, you're just going to be printing xij. So it's going to print everything in the first row, 1, 2, 3, everything in the second row, 1, 2, 3, everything in the third row, 1, 2, 3. So it's always going to be these counters that fill those array slots. All right, so that's scanning in, right? And you may do this with an fscanf, right? You may not have a traditional scanf. This may be a full fscanf in here. Same thing here, if you're printing to a file, you can do this with an fprintf, no big deal. I also wanted to tell you how to use multidimensional arrays with functions. So I've set up just a super quick function. All this function is doing is multiplying each element of the array by 5. I didn't want to make the math ultra complicated in this example so that you could follow along easily. Now, when I set up this function call, you can see up at the top, I have my function prototype. So because all arrays are declared as pointers already, we don't actually need a call by value function. We can just make this void. You could have it return something if you wanted to, but I've tried to go simple here. I've given it a name, and then I've told it to expect an integer multidimensional array called array with 2 dimensions. Now you can see I left this first one blank. That's fairly standard. It doesn't really care how many rows I have. But when you send a multidimensional array down to a function, you must include this second number. Now, you don't have to use it as a macro. You can include the actual number here, but you have to include the number. If you don't, your array will be very messed up and you'll probably get some warnings on data type errors. So we go down to the function call, right? It's just called func. When I send this down, I have to send the name of the array, nothing else. This is just a pointer to the start of the array. So it's just telling it where it starts so that when I go down and actually modify the array, it actually modifies X back in main function because it's going to do call by reference with arrays no matter what. When I get down to my function itself, anytime I see the word array, that's actually referring back to X that I made in main. And all we're doing here, right, is taking each element of the array ij, and multiplying it by 5, right? I tried to keep the math simple just for illustrative purposes. Okay, so let's go back up here and let's run this function. So when I run this, it's gonna ask me to enter all 9 variables for the matrix. It's gonna print them back out to me. It's gonna run the function, so that should multiply every element by 5. And then it will print back out to me the changed matrix. So just showing you that that function will pass it back through call by reference, even though it's in a separate function. Okay. So just for ease of illustration here, I'm actually gonna make every single element in this array the same number, just so you can kind of see how this works. So that's entering all the elements in the first row. So here, column 0, column 1, column 2. Now I do the next row and then the third row. All right, so that's the matrix I entered. Then it gets passed down to the function where it gets multiplied by 5 and it prints back that same array after it's been changed. So super, super simple, right? All we're doing is multiplying it, but I just want to show you how that looks when we do it with the for loops. I also want to show you what happens if, for example, you leave this off. What's going to happen if I take this out and let's say, for example, instead I put that number here. I just get confused. All right. You can see, oh my gosh, we have a lot of errors happening down in my build log here. Right? It doesn't understand what I'm trying to say. This has an incomplete element type because remember, this actual data type is int star 3 for that number of columns. And since I've left this out, it'd be the same thing as leaving out int in declaring a data type. It's like as bad as doing that. Your computer doesn't understand what's going on. So definitely make sure that you have that second number entered. Let's see what happens if I leave these both blank. Yeah, same thing. So this is an int star 3 data type, but because I don't have this in here, it has no idea when to loop down to the next row of the array. It will just keep trying to store these linearly and it doesn't understand. So you do absolutely have to put in that second number. Otherwise you'll start getting these weird errors. All right, and as soon as we do that, everything goes back to normal. This should work perfectly. Okay, so quick review on multidimensional arrays. When you set them up the same way as you'd set up a traditional array, except you'll just have extra square brackets on the end for however many extra dimensions that you need. In most examples, we won't use more than 2. When you're passing multidimensional arrays down to functions, remember that you can leave the first element blank, but you should always, always, always have that second element number in there. Even if you use a macro to do it, that's fine. It has to be included. Also remember, if you send a multidimensional array down to a function, you only send it by the name in the actual function call, just like a regular array. You don't include any of the brackets when you send it down or any ampersands. The last thing to remember with multidimensional arrays is that for every dimension you have, you'll need to have another nested for loop. So if you have a 2-dimensional array, you'll need at least 2 nested for loops to be able to get through all the scans and all of the prints for that array. Thanks for joining me for the quick review number 8 of multidimensional arrays. I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via email, or you can leave a comment below. I do check them frequently. Again, I'm Professor Casey. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you have a great one.